"You've seen me undressed, now you must marry me," said the city girl to the giant cowboy. "It begins with a flood, a soaked dress, and 2 watchful eyes on a lonely shack. By sundown, the whole town whispers, and to save her honor, she speaks words that change both their lives. The giant cowboy, silent and scarred by loss, agrees before the church bell stops ringing. But this marriage isn't just about saving face. Behind the laughter of the saloon and the gossip on Main Street lies a darker truth. Railroad men circling like vultures, hungry for water rights, ready to crush anyone in their path. And when the wedding bells fade, iron keys rattle in the sheriff's jail as the cowboy stands accused of a crime he didn't commit. Dust rises, hooves thunder. A woman's faith and a man's name are on the line. Can a single vow spoken in desperation become the bond that saves them both? Or will scandal and greed tear their world apart? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The summer rain drummed against the tin roof of the line shack, its steady rhythm broken only by occasional rumbles of thunder. Amanda Whitmore huddled closer to the potbelly stove, wrapped in the oversized trail coat that Luke Brannan had wordlessly offered her. The rough wool held the warmth of his body, smelling of horse and tobacco and wood smoke. She drew it tighter around her shoulders, keenly aware of the tall rancher's broad back turned respectfully toward her as she tried to dry her sodden clothing. The carriage accident played over in her mind, the sudden rush of muddy water in the arroyo, the sickening lurch as the wheels slipped, and her trunk tumbling into the churning current along with her favorite parasol. Thank heaven the driver had gone for help, though she wondered what was taking him so long to return. Luke shifted his weight, boots creaking on the wooden floorboards. "Storm's letting up some," he said, his deep voice soft as distant thunder. "Might be able to head to town soon." "Thank you," Amanda replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "You've been very kind, Mr. Brannan." Before he could respond, voices and approaching hoofbeats made them both stiffen. 2 riders passed by the open door, their shadows brief as lightning across the threshold. Amanda caught their startled expressions before they wheeled their horses around and galloped away toward town. Luke's shoulders tensed. "Best get your dress back on, Miss Whitmore. Them boys'll have tales to tell." Her cheeks burned as she quickly donned her still damp clothing, hands trembling at the buttons. She knew all too well how gossip spread in small towns, had fled St. Louis to escape just such whispers after a broken engagement. Now here she was, caught in an even more compromising situation. By the time they reached town, the damage was done. Main Street churned with activity despite the lessening rain, with clusters of people speaking in hushed voices that died away as Amanda and Luke rode past. Her driver, still soaked to the skin, was gesturing wildly in front of the saloon to a growing crowd. "The carriage just went right over," she heard him exclaim. "Water everywhere. Miss Whitmore soaked through." His words dissolved into unintelligible fragments that nevertheless drew knowing looks and barely suppressed laughter from the men, while several women pressed their hands to their mouths in shock. Amanda felt the weight of every stare, heard the rustle of every whispered judgment. The familiar shame threatened to overwhelm her, but something else rose up alongside it, a fierce determination not to be cowed again by wagging tongues and small minds. Before Luke could help her down from his horse, she slid from the saddle and strode purposefully toward her uncle's mercantile. Her sodden skirts left wet prints on the wooden steps as she climbed to the porch where the dinner bell hung. Its brass surface caught the light of the newly lit street lanterns as she grasped the rope. The clear notes rang out over the murmuring crowd, silencing every voice on Main Street. Amanda turned to face them all, chin held high despite her trembling hands. Her gaze found Luke, still mounted on his horse, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "You've seen me undressed." Her voice carried clearly across the street, steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Now you must marry me." The silence deepened. Puddles reflected the warm glow of lanterns as everyone waited for Luke's response. He sat motionless for a long moment, studying her with those quiet eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded once. "If it keeps your name clean, Miss Whitmore," he said simply. The street erupted in whispers and exclamations. Lanterns bobbed as people pressed closer, eager to witness every moment of the unfolding drama. Through the rising tide of voices, Amanda saw her Uncle Thomas emerge from the mercantile, his face a mixture of shock and distress as he clutched his hat in trembling hands. "Amanda," he stammered. "Surely there's no need for such desperate measures?" But they both knew there was. In a frontier town like this, reputation was everything. A single afternoon of scandal could destroy not only her future prospects, but the credibility of their mercantile business as well. Thomas Whitmore looked from his niece to the tall rancher still sitting his horse in the street, torn between relief that Luke Brannan was known as an honorable man and panic at the sudden upheaval of all his careful plans. The rain had dwindled to a gentle patter, and the street gleamed with puddles that reflected the warm glow of lanterns and the first emerging stars. Amanda stood straight and proud on the mercantile porch, even as her heart raced at the magnitude of what she had just set in motion. She had acted on impulse, yes, but it was an impulse born of hard experience and clear-eyed understanding of her situation. Luke dismounted with fluid grace despite his size, landing with a splash in a puddle. He made his way through the crowd, which parted before him like water, until he stood at the foot of the steps looking up at her. Their eyes met, and in his steady gaze, Amanda saw something that gave her hope. Not love, not yet, but respect, and perhaps a hint of admiration for her courage. The rain-washed air between them seemed to crackle with possibility as the town held its collective breath, watching this most unusual proposal reach its conclusion in the gathering dusk of a stormy summer evening. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Amanda swept the mercantile's wooden porch. The steady swish of her broom matched the rhythm of her racing thoughts. Every few minutes, she caught glimpses of townspeople passing by, their curious gazes following her movements. Some nodded politely, others hurried past with averted eyes. The morning dew had barely dried when Luke Brannan's tall figure appeared at the end of the street. He walked with purpose, his good hat held respectfully in his hands. Amanda's grip tightened on the broom handle as he approached, but she lifted her chin and met his eyes steadily. "Miss Whitmore," he said, touching the brim of an imaginary hat. "Might I speak with your uncle?" "He's inside," Amanda replied, gesturing toward the door. The bell chimed as they entered the mercantile together, its familiar ring somehow different this morning. Uncle Thomas stood behind the counter, nervously adjusting his spectacles as Luke approached. Morning light streamed through the front windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. "Mr. Whitmore," Luke began, his deep voice steady and clear. "I've come to discuss proper arrangements. I aim to file lawful intentions at the county office. Do things right and proper, not some backroom deal." Amanda's uncle seemed to relax slightly at these words, but Amanda stepped forward. "If we're to proceed, I want a church wedding," she declared, "with Reverend Hart officiating." "Seems fitting," Luke agreed without hesitation. "Should we send someone to fetch the Reverend now?" Uncle Thomas nodded eagerly, perhaps too eagerly, and dispatched young Tommy Jenkins to bring the pastor. The boy ran off importantly, boots clattering on the boardwalk. While they waited, the morning grew warmer. Amanda busied herself straightening already neat shelves, aware of Luke's presence like a shadow at the edge of her vision. He stood quietly, neither fidgeting nor attempting to fill the silence with empty words. Reverend Hart arrived promptly, his kind face serious as he greeted them all. They gathered around the small table Uncle Thomas used for his ledgers, the morning sun warming their shoulders through the window. "Now then," the Reverend began, "let's speak plainly about what you're proposing." He turned to Luke first. "Tell us about your situation, son." Luke's response was direct and honest. "I've got steady work, my own spread up near Eagle Creek. Small ranch, but it's mine, free and clear. The house needs work, but it's sound. I break horses for extra wages and do smithing when needed." He paused, then added, "It's not fancy living, but it's honest." The Reverend nodded, then turned to Amanda. "And you, Miss Whitmore? What skills do you bring to this union?" "I keep excellent books," Amanda replied firmly. "I can sew, cook, and manage a household. I helped run my parents' shop in St. Louis before—" She trailed off, then straightened. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I suggest a week of banns," Reverend Hart said thoughtfully. "Time for proper announcements and chaperoned meetings. You should know each other better before taking such a serious step." As they discussed the details, the store's bell jangled. Pike Mallory stepped in, his city-cut suit dusty from the street but still sharp. He tipped his hat to Amanda with practiced charm. "Just need some nails," he announced, moving to the hardware section. But his eyes lingered on their gathering. "Say, Luke, been meaning to ask. You planning to keep running cattle up in that high pasture near the spring?" The room's atmosphere shifted noticeably. Luke's shoulders tensed, though his voice remained level. "Same as always, Pike. Water rights are clear in my deed." Of course," Pike said smoothly, counting out nails. "Just curious about your plans, what with changes coming and all." The meeting continued for another hour after Pike left, but his words hung in the air like smoke. They settled on a schedule of chaperoned visits, with the first to take place the following afternoon. When all was arranged, Luke offered to escort Amanda to the telegraph office. They walked side by side along the boardwalk, maintaining a proper distance. Amanda felt the weight of watching eyes from shop windows and passing wagons. A small girl waved shyly from across the street, and Amanda waved back, grateful for the simple, honest greeting. At the telegraph office, Luke helped her compose a message about her delayed trunk, stranded by the flood-damaged tracks. The operator assured them he'd send word as soon as it arrived. The sun was lowering toward the western hills when Luke finally prepared to leave. "I'll ride back out to check on the herd," he said, settling his hat carefully. "But I'll return tomorrow, Miss Whitmore. You have my word." Amanda watched him mount up and ride away, his straight-backed figure growing smaller against the golden afternoon light. When she could no longer see him, she returned to help Uncle Thomas close up the store. As darkness settled over the town, Amanda and her uncle knelt together for evening prayers in their small apartment above the Mercantile. Amanda's whispered thanks rose from her heart, gratitude for the steady strength she'd seen in Luke Brannan's eyes, for his honorable approach to their unusual circumstance. But beside her, Uncle Thomas's prayers seemed troubled, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles showed white. His amen caught in his throat, and Amanda wondered what burden weighed so heavily on his shoulders, something more than mere concern over yesterday's scandal. The floor creaked beneath them as they rose, and through the window Amanda could see the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now she held on to the hope she'd found in Luke's quiet dignity and straightforward manner. 2 days after Luke's first visit, golden lamplight spilled from the Mercantile's upstairs windows into the gathering dusk. Amanda arranged her mother's crystal preserves dish on the carefully set table, adjusting it just so. The blue and white checkered tablecloth, her best, covered the sturdy oak table that Uncle Thomas had carried up from the storeroom especially for this engagement supper. The familiar clip-clop of hooves on packed earth drew her to the window. Luke dismounted smoothly, leading his horse to the hitching post. Even from above, she could see he'd taken extra care with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, and he wore a fresh shirt under his best vest. Amanda smoothed her skirts and checked her reflection in the small mirror near the stairs. Her cheeks were pink from the cooking heat, but her hair was neat in its simple updo. The grey calico dress wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed. "He's here," she called softly to Uncle Thomas, who emerged from his bedroom straightening his string tie. Luke's steady footsteps sounded on the back stairs. The private entrance Uncle Thomas had insisted was more proper than coming through the store. He knocked twice, and Amanda opened the door. "Evening, Miss Whitmore," he said, ducking slightly to enter. The lamplight caught the silver at his temples, and Amanda noticed he'd trimmed his mustache. In one hand he held a cloth-wrapped package, in the other a paper sack that released the rich scent of coffee beans. "Fresh roasted from Socorro," he explained, handing the sack to Uncle Thomas. "And this?" He carefully unwrapped the other package, revealing a horseshoe bent and worked into the shape of a heart, its surface polished to a soft gleam. "Just a small token, if you'll accept it." "It's lovely," Amanda said softly, touching the smooth metal. Such a simple thing, yet the care taken in its making was evident in every curve. Reverend Hart and his wife arrived moments later, bringing a basket of fresh rolls. Mrs. Hart immediately offered to help Amanda in the kitchen, but Amanda had everything well in hand: a pot roast with vegetables, cornbread, and wild plum preserves she'd put up herself. The conversation flowed easily at first as they settled around the table. Luke spoke of good grazing in the high meadow, while Mrs. Hart shared news of the church social planned for harvest time. The food was praised, especially Amanda's preserves, which brought a proud smile to her face. But after grace was said, Uncle Thomas cleared his throat nervously, his fingers twisting his napkin. "Before we go further," he began, "there's something that needs saying." He glanced at Amanda, then fixed his gaze on his plate. "The mercantile. Well, it's leveraged to the St. Louis and Western Railroad for inventory credit." The room grew still. Luke set down his fork carefully, his expression watchful. "There's a clause," Uncle Thomas continued, his voice growing hoarse. "Pike can call the debt due if local water becomes restricted." He looked at Luke. "Your spring, specifically. If I default, they can seize the store and stock within a month." Amanda's hand flew to her throat. The pieces fell into place with crushing clarity. Pike's questions about the spring, Uncle Thomas's troubled prayers. Her impulsive marriage demand had unknowingly tangled Luke in her family's financial web. Luke's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the skin. "I'd planned to keep my range independent," he said quietly. "That spring's vital for the cattle?" Reverend Hart leaned forward. "Brother Thomas, why didn't you come to the church board? We might have found another way." "Pride, I suppose," Uncle Thomas admitted, "and by the time I understood the terms fully, it was too late. Pike holds all the papers now." A shadow passed across the window. Amanda glanced out to see Pike himself, standing at the hitching rail below, casual as a rattler in the sun. He tipped his hat when he caught her looking. "Survey crews coming through next week," he called up, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Just protecting progress, you understand. Good evening to you all." His boot heels clicked as he strolled away into the deepening dusk. Mrs. Hart touched Amanda's hand gently. "My dear, perhaps we should give you young people a moment to talk." The others made their goodbyes quietly, leaving Amanda and Luke alone in the lamplight. Luke stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense as he watched the street below. "I'll stand by my word," he said finally, turning to face her. "But you should know, men like Pike don't fight square. This won't be easy." Amanda rose and crossed to stand before him. "I trust you," she said simply, "and I trust God to show us the way through this." She met his gaze steadily. "I'll speak to Reverend Hart tomorrow about setting a date." Luke studied her face for a long moment, as if measuring her resolve. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, for he nodded slowly. "Then we'll face it together," he said, and in those few words Amanda heard both a promise and a prayer. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, with the last puddles from the cloudburst finally dried to dust. Luke guided his bay gelding down Main Street just as the mercantile's shutters were being thrown open. The courthouse bell tolled 8 times, its deep notes rolling across the wakening town. He dismounted at the courthouse steps, boots raising small puffs of dust. Inside, the marriage license lay ready on the clerk's desk, the paper crisp and official. Luke signed his name carefully, each letter precise despite his work-roughened hands. The clerk sanded the ink, then hung the document in the glass-fronted notice board beside the door. Reverend Hart met them on the boardwalk as planned. His kind face brightened at seeing both Amanda and Luke arriving punctually for their chaperoned walk. "I've set aside Friday evening for the ceremony," he announced. "That should allow time for—" He gestured discreetly at Amanda's simple day dress. "Yes, thank you," Amanda replied. "I'm headed to see Mrs. Peterson about alterations to a muslin gown. She promises it will be ready by Thursday noon, if the rail delivery arrives with the track repaired." They began their walk, the Reverend positioned properly between them. The morning sun cast their shadows long across the dusty street as townspeople nodded greetings. Luke noticed how Amanda held her head high, meeting each gaze directly despite the whispers that still followed them. "Now then," Reverend Hart said, "let's discuss your household arrangements. Luke, what preparations will you make for Amanda's comfort?" Luke cleared his throat. "The cabin's sound but small. I'll build a proper lean-to kitchen before the winter sets in. There's good pine up in the hills for lumber." Amanda nodded approvingly. "And I'll keep Uncle Thomas's store ledgers twice a week. He needs the help, and I'm good with figures." "That's settled then," the Reverend said. "A wife should support her family's interests, and your uncle will appreciate your skill with bookkeeping." They passed the sheriff's office, where Avery stood in the doorway, nursing his morning coffee. His weathered face was serious as he touched his hat brim to Amanda. "Luke," he said quietly as they drew near. "Pike's men were in the saloon till late, been drinking hard and talking harder. Watch yourself." "Much obliged," Luke replied evenly. The warning was hardly needed. He'd already spotted 3 railroad hands lounging against the livery stable wall, watching their progress with unfriendly eyes. As if Avery's words had summoned trouble, the men pushed off from the wall and swaggered into the street. Their boots were trail dusty, their expressions mean with whiskey and spite. "Well, if it ain't the shy bride and her gallant rescuer," the tallest one sneered. His companion sniggered, spreading out slightly. Amanda's spine stiffened, but Luke touched her elbow gently, then let his hand fall away. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried clearly. "I won't be bait for your game, boys. Best move along." Something in his calm tone, or perhaps the steady way he stood, neither advancing nor retreating, made the troublemakers hesitate. After a tense moment, they slouched away, muttering but deflated. Reverend Hart released a careful breath. "Well handled, Luke. Violence serves no one." They completed their walk, discussing simple wedding preparations. Amanda would wear her cross pendant. Luke would bring the ring he'd ordered from the silversmith in Socorro. The Reverend's wife would play the small pump organ, and the ceremony would be brief but proper. At the mercantile steps, Luke bid them good day. He mounted up, settling deep in his saddle for the ride home. The sun was past its peak as he rode at a steady trot, scanning his fence lines by habit. The familiar work of checking wire and posts continued until moonrise painted the range in silver. Back in town, Amanda sat at her small vanity table, watching the stars appear through her window. She carefully pinned a sprig of fresh sage beside her mirror, its clean, sharp scent filling the room. The herb had grown wild near the line shack where she'd first met Luke, a reminder of how strangely God worked his purpose through their lives. Kneeling beside her bed, Amanda clasped her hands and bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me courage for this path. Let what began as scandal become a marriage of honor, not mockery. Help me be worthy of the trust Luke shows in agreeing to this union." She climbed into bed, drawing up the quilt despite the lingering summer warmth. Her sleep was light, broken by both anxiety and determination. Yet underneath the worry lay a steady certainty. They would face whatever came together, with faith and resolve. The marriage license hung in its frame at the courthouse, making their intentions public and binding. There could be no turning back now, even if Pike's pressure grew worse. Amanda's impulsive declaration would become something true and lasting, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than mere necessity. The Tuesday sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when Amanda adjusted her riding skirt, mounting the gentle mare Luke had brought for her. Mrs. Sutter, the baker's wife, settled onto her own borrowed horse with practiced ease, her presence ensuring proper decorum for Amanda's first visit to Luke's homestead. Luke led them along a winding trail that climbed steadily through rolling grassland. The morning air carried the sweet scent of late summer, dry grass whispering beneath their horses' hooves. Amanda's mare followed Luke's bay gelding, picking her way carefully over the uneven ground. "Watch for loose stones," Luke called back. "Trail gets steeper past the oak grove." Amanda nodded, grateful for the sturdy side saddle that kept her secure. Mrs. Sutter hummed a hymn tune behind them, providing both companionship and chaperonage as the Reverend had advised. After an hour's steady climb, Luke reined in beside a rocky outcrop. A clear spring trickled from between granite slabs, feeding into a carefully constructed wooden trough. The water sparkled in the morning light, precious as silver in the dry land. "This is what Pike wants," Luke said quietly. "Springs never failed, even in drought years." He dismounted, helping Amanda down with careful hands. "I'll show you how to draw water. Essential skill out here." Amanda watched as Luke demonstrated the proper way to dip and lift the wooden bucket, avoiding stirring up sediment. Her first attempt splashed her skirts, but the second try came up clear and sweet. "You're a quick study," Luke approved. They led the horses to drink, while Mrs. Sutter unpacked the basket she'd brought. Inside Luke's cabin, Amanda was pleased to find it neat, if sparse. Luke showed her where he kept his sourdough starter, teaching her how to feed and salt it properly. "Bread's better with good starter," he explained. "Been keeping this one alive 3 years now." While Luke planed rough boards outside for the promised lean-to kitchen, Amanda settled by the window with his mending. The shirt was good cotton, torn at the shoulder seam. Her neat stitches soon had it sound again. Mrs. Sutter busied herself sweeping the packed earth floor, offering quiet advice about keeping house on the frontier. The morning passed peacefully with the rhythmic scrape of Luke's plane and the women's productive work. At noon, they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread on the cabin's small porch. The view stretched for miles, clouds casting shadows that raced across the distant plains. "Need to ride to the Mescalero camp later this week," Luke mentioned, breaking a comfortable silence. "Got some horse trading to do with Nantan. He's their farrier now, though he used to scout." His voice softened. "Known him since before the fever took my Sarah and little James." Amanda listened quietly, hearing the grief still raw in his voice. Mrs. Sutter bowed her head briefly, acknowledging the loss. "He's a good man, Nantan," Luke continued after a moment. "Fair trader, true friend, stood by me in hard times." "I'd like to meet him someday," Amanda said gently. Luke's eyes softened at her words, recognition of her acceptance warming his expression. The afternoon sun was lowering when Mrs. Sutter glanced meaningfully at the sky. "We should start back soon," she suggested. "Town's a fair ride yet." They packed up the remaining cornbread and mounted fresh horses. The return trip followed a different trail, one that crossed a shallow creek. Near the water, they came upon a railroad wagon, its crew taking measurements with chains and transit glasses. Luke's hand didn't move toward his holstered Colt, loaded with 5 chambers as always. But Amanda noticed how his shoulders tensed. He merely touched his hat brim as they passed, saying nothing to the surveyors who were clearly mapping distances to his spring. Back in town, Amanda stopped briefly at the dressmaker's shop. Her wedding dress was coming along well, the muslin taking shape under skilled hands. She touched the fabric gently, hope rising despite the railroad's threats. Luke saw them safely to the mercantile's door. "I'll fetch Nantan if trouble comes," he promised quietly. His word carries weight. He remembers every promise, every treaty line. He mounted up, heading out as dusk painted the hills purple and gold. Amanda watched him go, understanding growing in her heart. Their marriage might have started from scandal, but something stronger was taking root. trust built on shared work and quiet understanding. Luke's friendship with Nantan spoke of a man who valued loyalty above prejudice, who kept faith even when others broke theirs. Mrs. Sutter patted her arm knowingly. "You'll make a good team," she said. "Takes more than railroad men to break folks who stand together." Wednesday morning's peace shattered with the steady rhythm of hammering. The sound echoed across Luke's homestead as he and Olin, a trusted ranch hand, worked on adding rafters to the promised lean-to kitchen. The summer sun climbed steadily higher as the men measured, cut, and secured each beam with practiced efficiency. Amanda arrived just before 10 o'clock, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle of fresh bread and a small crock of lard. The scent of yeast and wheat drew appreciative glances from both workers. She paused to watch Luke balance on a crossbeam, his movements sure despite the height. "Much obliged," Luke called down, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "We could use some sustenance about now." Olin grinned, showing a gap where he'd lost a tooth years back. "Miss Whitmore, that bread smells like heaven itself." They had just settled on upturned crates to enjoy the simple meal when hoofbeats approached. A railroad man rode up, his horse's flanks dark with sweat. He waved a paper like a flag of victory. "Morning, Brannon," the man called out, too cheerful by half. "Got something here needs your attention. Just a protective survey regarding water rights." Luke stood slowly, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "That's so." His voice remained level, but Amanda noticed how his shoulders squared. The railroad man dismounted, boots raising small puffs of dust. "Simple matter, really. Company's just looking to ensure fair access to natural resources. Sign here, and we'll be all set." Luke took the paper, reading carefully while Amanda and Olin watched. His face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened. "This here document would limit access to my spring. The one I've been using since I filed my claim 5 years back." "Just a formality," the man assured, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Reckon I'll decline." Luke pulled out a small leather notebook from his vest pocket. "Mind if I copy down your name, mister?" The railroad man shifted his weight. "Thompson. William Thompson." Luke's pencil scratched across the page, recording the name and date with deliberate care. "Much obliged for bringing this to my attention, Mr. Thompson. I'll be sure to file it proper-like with the sheriff." Thompson's smile faded. He mounted up, gathering his reins tight. "Pike won't take kindly to delays, Brannon." "Ain't looking for Pike's kindness," Luke replied evenly. "Just following the law." After Thompson rode off, Luke turned to Amanda. "Best we ride to town. Sheriff ought to see this paper." An hour later, they stood in Sheriff Avery's office, the document spread across his desk. The sheriff read it twice, his weathered face thoughtful. "They're pushing hard," Avery said finally. "But they ain't got the right of it yet." He stood, pulling a heavy book from a shelf. "Let's check your brand registration first, Luke. Then I'd suggest filing a formal water statement with the county clerk." The brand book confirmed Luke's claim, his distinctive mark recorded years before any railroad survey. Amanda watched as the sheriff made careful notes, documenting dates and details. "Best get that water statement filed quick," Avery advised. "Miss Whitmore, with your fine handwriting, maybe you could help Luke with that." At the clerk's office, Amanda dipped the pen in fresh ink. Her script flowed across the paper, neat and clear as she recorded Luke's water claim. Each detail mattered: the spring's location, the date of first use, the improvements Luke had made to the trough and channel. Their task complete, hunger drove them to Mrs. Sutter's bakery. The meat pies were still warm, the crust flaking perfectly as they sat on the bench outside. The sun beat down steady and strong, but neither minded the heat. "You write real pretty," Luke commented, brushing pie crumbs from his shirt. "Makes everything look proper and official-like." Amanda smiled, pleased by the simple compliment. "Words have power when they're written right. My father taught me that." Their next stop was the church, where Reverend Hart welcomed them into the cool sanctuary. The pastor listened gravely to their tale, then bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," he intoned, his deep voice resonant in the quiet space, "guide these your servants in their search for justice. Remind us that your truth, like water-cutting stone, works slow but sure. Give them patience and wisdom in these trying times." Amanda felt peace settle over her as they said, "Amen." The Reverend's words about water-cutting stone struck true. Some forces worked best through persistence rather than power. The afternoon waned as Amanda helped Uncle Thomas at the mercantile. They worked steadily, stacking crates and checking inventory. Her uncle's cough worried her. It seemed worse in the dusty storeroom. "You should rest," she urged, taking a heavy box from his hands. Thomas sank onto a chair, his breathing labored. "Can't rest too long, dear heart. Pike's debt notice." He pulled out a wrinkled paper from his vest. "Could be called any day now." Amanda's heart sank as she read the terms. The amount seemed impossible, far more than the store's entire stock could cover. She understood now why her uncle's shoulders stooped under more than just physical burdens. As they locked up for the night, a train whistle echoed across the darkening land. Uncle Thomas paused, key in hand, listening to the lonesome sound. Amanda stood beside him, their shadows stretched long by the lamplight. That whistle carried change on its breath. Progress, some called it. But progress, Amanda was learning, could cut two ways, like a blade that both cleared paths and wounded the unwary. Thursday dawned bright and clear, the morning air crisp with autumn's first whispers. Amanda stood at her window, watching the sun climb over distant mesas, while her heart fluttered with anticipation. Tomorrow she would be a bride. The dressmaker's buckboard rattled down Main Street precisely at noon, kicking up little clouds of dust. Mrs. Peterson herself carried the wrapped gown into her shop, treating it like precious cargo. Amanda followed her into the back room, where late summer light streamed through muslin curtains. "Let's see how it fits, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, carefully unwrapping the cream-colored fabric. Amanda's fingers trembled slightly as she touched the dress. The alterations were perfect, modest yet elegant, with a ribboned waist that emphasized her slender figure. The muslin was cool and smooth against her skin as Mrs. Peterson helped her into it. "Turn around now," the dressmaker instructed, making minor adjustments. "There, simple and proper, just as you wanted." Amanda studied her reflection in the spotted mirror. The cream color complemented her complexion, and the ribbon at her waist tied into a neat bow. It wasn't the elaborate silk gown she'd once dreamed of, but somehow this practical dress felt more right. The telegraph office's bell chimed as she left the dressmaker's. Amanda's steps slowed, then turned toward the sound. Mr. Barnes, the operator, was already holding out a telegram. "Just came through, Miss Whitmore," he said kindly. "Track's fixed now, but—" Amanda read the brief message. Her cousins and aunt expressed regrets, the notice too short for proper travel arrangements. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it into her pocket. The small wedding would have to suffice. Perhaps it was providence rather than misfortune. After all, hadn't God's hand been evident in everything since that rainy day? Meanwhile, Luke guided his horse along the familiar trail to Nantan's camp, saddlebags heavy with flour and a broken stirrup iron. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the scrubland as he approached the cluster of dwellings. Children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Nantan emerged from his work shelter, wiping his hands on a leather apron. His eyes crinkled with welcome, though his face remained composed. "Brother," he greeted Luke, gesturing toward the shade. Luke dismounted, retrieving his offerings. "Brought you some flour," he said, "and a stirrup that could use your skills." He hesitated, then added, "And I came for counsel, if you're willing." Nantan examined the broken stirrup, turning it in practiced hands. "Metal speaks truth when properly shaped," he said, moving to his forge. "Like a man's words when properly chosen." As Nantan worked the metal, Luke explained recent events, the marriage announcement, Pike's pressure, the water rights dispute. He was careful to emphasize that he sought wisdom, not muscle. Nantan listened while he hammered, each strike precise and purposeful. When the metal cooled, he tested the repair with strong hands. "A man's name," he said finally, "is carried on other tongues. Your name has always spoken truth here." He set the mended stirrup aside. "I will attend your wedding. If questions of character arise, I will speak of what I know." Luke's throat tightened with gratitude. "Thank you, brother." The sun was dropping toward the horizon when Luke started home. He kept his horse at a careful lope, mindful of holes in the failing light. Coyotes began their evening chorus across the flats, their yips and howls echoing off distant rocks. The stirrup's repair work caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like a promise. In town, Amanda sat in the parlor's lamp glow, carefully hemming a man's shirt. She'd chosen sturdy fabric in a practical brown, but her stitches were tiny and even, each one a small act of devotion. Beside her chair sat a jar of peach preserves set aside for their first shared meal. The fruit's golden color seemed to capture summer's warmth, preserved for darker days ahead. Uncle Thomas's footsteps creaked on the stairs. He entered the parlor, holding an envelope, its flap sealed with wax. "Amanda," he said softly, "there's something you should have." She set aside her sewing and accepted the envelope. Inside were copies of the store's deed and other legal papers, carefully annotated in her uncle's precise hand. "Just in case," he said, not meeting her eyes. "A bride should know where she stands." Amanda rose and embraced him, feeling the slight tremor in his frame. "Thank you, Uncle, but we'll manage this together with God's help." Later, as she prepared for bed, the house settled into nighttime quiet. Only the crickets maintained their steady chorus, nature's lullaby. Through her window, she watched the moon rise silver and serene over the rail yard. Its light transformed the metal tracks into ribbons of pearl, beautiful despite the trouble they represented. Amanda touched the sealed envelope on her bedside table, then folded her hands in prayer. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight she had a mended stirrup, a friend's promise, and papers that spoke of both trust and worry. Most importantly, she had faith in Luke, in herself, and in the God who had led her here, step by unexpected step. The little church glowed with warmth as lantern light spilled through its windows into the deepening twilight. Inside, Mrs. Hart coaxed a gentle hymn from the pump organ, its notes floating through air sweet with wild roses someone had gathered for the occasion. The wooden pews held only a handful of guests. Sheriff Avery sat straight-backed in his Sunday best. Mrs. Sutter dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and several ranch families who knew Luke nodded in quiet approval. Nantan stood respectfully near the back, his dignified presence adding weight to the moment. Reverend Hart adjusted his collar and opened his Bible as the last rays of sunset painted the church windows in amber and gold. The organ music shifted to a wedding march, and all heads turned as Amanda appeared in the doorway on Uncle Thomas's arm. She wore her cream muslin dress with quiet grace, a spray of desert flowers in her hands. Though simple, she carried herself like a queen, her eyes bright with purpose. Luke stood tall at the altar, his ranch coat freshly brushed, his usually weathered face softened with wonder as he watched her approach. Uncle Thomas's steps were measured and proud as he escorted Amanda down the short aisle. When they reached the front, he placed her hand in Luke's with gentle dignity, then took his seat, twisting his hat brim between nervous fingers. Reverend Hart's voice filled the small space with warmth. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The ceremony was plain but profound. Luke and Amanda exchanged straightforward vows, promising to share work and mercy, to face whatever came together with faith and steadfast hearts. Their voices rang clear and true in the hushed church. "I, Luke, take thee, Amanda. I, Amanda, take thee, Luke." When they slipped simple gold bands onto each other's fingers, Mrs. Hart's organ hummed softly in the background. After Reverend Hart pronounced them man and wife, Luke's kiss was gentle and reverent. The small gathering moved to the churchyard where a table had been set with cake and coffee. Lanterns swayed from tree branches in the evening breeze, casting pools of golden light across familiar faces. Mrs. Sutter had outdone herself with the cake, 3 tiers of white frosting decorated with sugar roses. Nantan approached the newlyweds, holding something wrapped in soft leather. "For your home," he said, unwrapping a small wooden horse, expertly carved with flowing mane and alert ears. "May it remind you that strength and grace run together." Amanda touched the carving with wondering fingers. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Thank you." Luke clasped his friend's hand, words unnecessary between them. The carved horse would have pride of place on their mantle, a symbol of friendship that bridged 2 worlds. As dusk deepened to purple, the guests began to drift away. Mrs. Sutter and Uncle Thomas exchanged knowing looks and nodded their approval as Luke helped Amanda mount her horse. The couple set off at a walking pace toward their home, the mile-long trail lit by stars beginning to sparkle overhead. The night was peaceful, filled with cricket song and the soft clop of hoofbeats. Amanda's heart felt full to bursting as they approached the familiar shape of Luke's house. Their house now. The new lean-to kitchen jutted from the main cabin, its fresh-cut wood pale in the starlight. Luke helped her down, then carried her bags inside with careful courtesy. Amanda lit the lamp she'd brought from town, its warm glow making the simple room feel like home. Her rocking chair already waited by the hearth, and Luke had built shelves for her books and dishes. They spoke softly of tomorrow's plans, feeding chickens, baking bread, visiting Uncle Thomas after breakfast. Such ordinary things, yet they felt like precious pearls of promise strung between them. Amanda moved about the kitchen, settling her things into their new places. "This shelf seems just right for preserves," she said, reaching for the jar of peach preserves she'd saved for their first meal together. The sudden thunder of approaching hooves shattered their peaceful moment. Luke's hand moved toward his gun belt, then stilled. Deputy Cole's voice called out, "Luke Brannan!" The deputy burst through the door, breathing hard, his young face twisted with discomfort. "I've got a warrant," he announced, pulling a paper from his vest. The county judge's stamp stood out dark against the pale document. "You're charged with stealing 12 head of cattle from Pike Mallory's holding pen last night." Amanda's hand flew to her throat. "That's impossible. Luke was here, building our kitchen." Luke's face had gone still, but his voice remained steady. "Read it proper, Cole." The deputy cleared his throat and read the formal charges. When he finished, Luke nodded once and reached for his gun belt. With deliberate care, he removed his Colt and slid it across the table toward Cole. "I'll come peaceful," he said quietly. "Amanda, best you stay with your uncle tonight." The lamp flame wavered, throwing jumping shadows on the walls. The jar of preserves stood forgotten on the shelf, its golden contents reflecting the uncertain light like tears. The night air had turned cool as Deputy Cole led their small procession toward town. His saddle lantern swung like a lonely star, casting shifting shadows across the rutted trail. The deputy rode straight-backed, one hand near his holster despite Luke's peaceful surrender. Behind him, Amanda perched side-saddle on Cole's spare mount, her wedding shawl pulled tight against the chill. Her cream muslin dress gleamed faintly in the darkness, a bitter reminder of joy so quickly shattered. "Much obliged for the ride, Deputy?" she said softly, determined to maintain dignity. Cole merely grunted, but his shoulders relaxed slightly at her courteous tone. Luke rode beside Cole, his hands loose on his reins, face set in stone. Without his gun belt, he looked somehow more vulnerable, though his broad shoulders remained squared. The horse's hooves made hollow sounds on the packed earth, marking time like a funeral drum. Main Street lay deserted when they reached town, though lamplight leaked from beneath a few doors. News traveled fast in small places. By morning, everyone would know the sheriff had Luke Brannan in custody on their wedding night. At the jailhouse, Sheriff Avery waited with a lamp held high. His weathered face showed genuine regret as he watched Luke dismount. "Sorry about this, Luke." "Law's the law. Got to hold you till we sort it proper." Amanda slid from her borrowed horse, stumbling slightly on legs stiff from the unfamiliar side saddle. Luke started to reach for her, then stopped himself, remembering his status as prisoner. The small gesture made her heart ache. Inside, the sheriff's office smelled of coffee grounds and gun oil. A tin cup sat half empty on the desk, evidence of Avery's interrupted evening. The cell keys jangled harsh and loud in the quiet room as the sheriff selected the right one. "Can I speak with my husband?" Amanda asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Just for a moment?" Sheriff Avery studied her, then nodded. "Keep it brief. Cole, step out front with me." The two lawmen retreated, leaving Amanda and Luke in the narrow corridor between desk and cells. Through the barred window, moonlight laid silver stripes across the floor. Luke gripped the cell bars, his knuckles white. "Amanda, listen close. Whatever Pike offers, don't sell that spring. Don't trade what's right for what's easy." "I won't," she promised. "But Luke, these charges are lies. We'll prove it." "Truth's got a way of coming clear," he agreed quietly. "Just don't let them rush you into bargains built on falsehood. That spring's not just water, it's a trust. Means something to more folks than just us." Before Amanda could respond, boots scraped outside. Reverend Hart entered, Bible in hand, his kind face grave in the lamplight. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "Shall we pray together?" They bowed their heads as the preacher's deep voice filled the corridor. "Lord, let truth rise like dawn, justice flow like springs. Guard these two through darkness, guide all hearts toward light. Amen." "I'll start at sunrise," Reverend Hart promised, touching Amanda's shoulder. "Get statements from folks who know Luke's character. Many will speak up, you'll see." Amanda squeezed Luke's hand through the bars one last time, then let the sheriff lead her out. The night air had grown colder. She pulled her shawl closer as she walked the short distance to Uncle Thomas's house. She found him in the kitchen, hands shaking as he tried to light the stove for tea. Without a word, she took the matches and set the kettle on, then helped him sink into his chair. "It's my fault," he whispered. "If I hadn't borrowed from Pike." "No," Amanda said firmly. "Pike chose this wickedness, but we'll fight with truth, not guilt." She spread their documents across the kitchen table, the water rights filing with her neat script, copies of deeds Uncle Thomas had wisely set aside, and a fresh sheet of paper. "Help me list men who've dealt with Luke," she said, dipping a pen. "Men who know his honest ways with cattle and brands." As the kettle sang, they compiled names: ranchers who'd traded stock, hands who'd worked his spread, even the farrier who'd bought his best yearling. Uncle Thomas's trembling eased as they worked, purpose replacing panic. Near midnight, Amanda sat at the telegraph office desk, carefully composing her message to Brand Inspector Holt. The operator had grumbled at the late hour, but opened up when she pressed an extra $1 into his palm. "Urgent stop request. Immediate review. Pike Mallory Brands vs. County Book Stop Possible False Claim. Reluke Brannan heard. Stop wedding night arrest. Requires swift confirmation. Stop reply care of Sheriff Avery. Stop Amanda Brannan." The clicking of the telegraph faded into night silence as she walked back to Uncle Thomas's house. Too weary to change, she draped her wedding dress over a kitchen chair and sank into fitful sleep in her old room upstairs. Dawn came too soon, announced by roosters crowing across town. Amanda rose and pinned her hair up with determined fingers, smoothing yesterday's dress as best she could. She ate 3 bites of bread while standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the eastern sky pink. "I'll send word when I know more," she told Uncle Thomas, who nodded from his chair, looking like he hadn't slept at all. The town was beginning to stir as she walked toward the sheriff's office. A freight wagon creaked past, the driver tipping his hat. The baker's boy darted by with fresh loaves. A curtain twitched in the dressmaker's window. Amanda lifted her chin and straightened her spine. Let them look. Let them whisper. She had work to do, and truth would not wait for gossip to fade. The sun cleared the horizon as she reached the sheriff's door, flooding Main Street with golden light. Amanda took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and knocked firmly. Whatever the day might bring, she would face it standing tall, armed with facts and faith. Luke was counting on her. Justice was counting on her. And she did not intend to fail either one. Morning sunlight burned through wisps of valley fog as Amanda mounted her borrowed horse. Sheriff Avery waited astride his bay gelding, his badge catching the early light. The air held the crisp edge of autumn, making the horses blow steam from their nostrils. "Ready, Mrs. Brannan?" Avery asked, using her married name with deliberate courtesy. Amanda nodded, settling her skirts over the side saddle. "Lead on, Sheriff." They rode at an easy pace toward Pike's Railroad, holding pens on the outskirts of town. The fog thinned as they climbed the gentle rise, revealing scattered clouds painted pink and gold by the rising sun. Prairie grass whispered beneath their horses' hooves, still damp with dew. "Stage should arrive by noon," Avery said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Brand Inspector Holt telegraphed he's bringing the county book." "Good," Amanda replied. "The sooner we examine those brands, the better." The holding pens came into view, rough-hewn cedar posts forming 3 connected corrals. Inside, about 15 head of cattle milled restlessly, their brands dark against dusty hides. 2 of Pike's men lounged against the fence, straightening as the sheriff approached. Amanda dismounted carefully, smoothing her skirts. She pulled a small notebook and pencil from her pocket, ready to record what they found. Years of keeping store accounts had taught her the value of detailed notes. The noon stage arrived in a cloud of dust, right on schedule. Mr. Holt stepped down, a leather-bound book tucked under one arm. He was a spare man with sun-weathered skin and careful eyes. After greeting the sheriff, he turned to Amanda with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Brannan, let's have a look at these brands, shall we?" They gathered at the corral fence. Amanda opened her notebook as Holt spread the county brand book on a flat fence rail. His finger traced down the page to the B-bar registration. "Here's Luke Brannan's recorded mark," he said. "Note the lower loop, extends a full hand span." Amanda leaned closer, comparing the book's drawing to the brands on the penned cattle. The difference jumped out immediately. The fresh brands showed a distinctly shorter bottom curve. "I see it," she said, quickly sketching both versions in her notebook. "The new brands are different." Holt's expression grew serious. "Sheriff, I'll need a hammer, bucket of water, and time to check these marks proper. Might be overburns hiding older brands beneath." Before Avery could respond, hoofbeats announced Pike Mallory's arrival. He rode up on his glossy black horse, his city clothes immaculate despite the dusty trail. "What's this about examining my stock?" Pike demanded, swinging down. "I've got investors to protect, deadlines to meet." "We're conducting a legal investigation, Mr. Mallory," Sheriff Avery said calmly, his hand resting near his holstered Colt revolver. "Brand Inspector Holt has full authority here." Pike's face reddened, but he held his tongue as Holt began his methodical examination. The inspector worked slowly, wetting each brand and tapping the scarred hide with his hammer, checking how the marks responded. After an hour, he straightened with a grim expression. "Sheriff, I'm finding evidence of overburns, fresh marks laid over older brands. This needs proper investigation." He turned to address them all. "I'm calling for a public hearing, sundown today in the town hall. We'll present findings and take testimony." "This is outrageous!" Pike sputtered, but Avery's steady gaze silenced him. Amanda didn't wait to hear more. She mounted quickly and rode for the telegraph office, composing her message as she went. Inside, she handed the operator a carefully worded request. "Captain Jesperson, Fort Stanton. Request neutral observer for urgent brand hearing, stop sunset today. Town hall stop concerns railroad water rights and alleged cattle theft. Stop please confirm attendance, stop, Amanda Brannan." The answer came within the hour. "MRS, Brannan. Will ride with one sergeant if road holds stop expect arrival before dusk stop." Captain Jesperson relief flooded through her. The Army's presence would help ensure a fair hearing. But there was more work to be done. She found Mrs. Sutter at the general store and quickly explained her need for a chaperone. "We must ride to Nanton's camp," she said. "There may be witnesses to what really happened 2 nights ago." The older woman agreed without hesitation, and soon they were trotting along the western trail. The sun had climbed high, burning away the last of the morning fog. They found Nantan working at his forge, the rhythmic ring of hammer on metal echoing off the hills. He set aside his work when Amanda explained their errand. 2 nights passed? He said thoughtfully. Yes, Sosie saw something. Let me fetch her. The elder woman emerged from a nearby shelter, her dark eyes sharp in her weathered face. Through Nantan's translation, she described seeing strange riders moving cattle by moonlight, not Luke's usual hands, and too early to be last night's alleged theft. They pushed the beasts hard, Nantan added in his careful English. Not the way Luke moves stock. He respects good horses, good cattle. These men rode rough. Amanda's pencil flew across her notebook, recording every detail. Will you both testify at the hearing? Your words could help prove Luke's innocence. Nantan nodded slowly. We will come. Truth must be spoken, or lies grow strong. The sun had passed its peak when Amanda and Mrs. Sutter rode back to town. People moved with purpose along Main Street, word of the evening's hearing spreading fast. Amanda's spine straightened as she passed the jail. Soon, if justice prevailed, Luke would walk free. The Brands told their story, witnesses would speak, and truth would rise like dawn breaking over the prairie. She still had hours of work ahead, organizing testimony, preparing documents, ensuring all was ready for the hearing. But hope burned bright in her heart, fueled by the morning's discoveries. Pike's scheme was unraveling thread by thread, and she intended to pull each one until the whole fabric fell apart. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the mercantile windows as Amanda organized her leather document folder. She had hours until the hearing, and every minute counted. Her wedding ring caught the light as she smoothed each fresh page, a reminder of all that hung in the balance. Miss Amanda, a young voice called from the doorway. Mrs. Brannan, She turned to see Eli, the 12-year-old ranch hand who had spent last winter in Luke's bunkhouse. His worn boots scuffed the wooden floor as he approached, hat clutched respectfully in his hands. I heard about Mr. Luke, he said, eyes earnest beneath his shock of sandy hair. I got something to tell about him, if it'll help. Amanda pulled out a clean sheet of paper. Please, sit down, Eli. Tell me everything you remember. The boy settled into a chair, his feet barely touching the floor. Last winter, when I first came to work, I didn't have proper boots. My feet were always cold and wet. Mr. Luke, he saw me limping one day and didn't say nothing at first. But that evening he brought me a pair of boots, good leather ones that fit just right. Eli's voice grew stronger. Said they were spare, but I knew they were new. Cost near a month's wages, I reckon. Amanda's pen scratched across the paper, recording every word. What about his handling of cattle, Eli? The way he dealt with strays. Oh, he was always proper about that. Eli said quickly. Found a calf once with no clear brand. Could have claimed it easy, but Mr. Luke rode half a day checking neighboring ranches till he found where it belonged. Always said a man's reputation was worth more than any stray beef. She had him sign and date the statement, then sent him to fetch Reverend Hart. The minister arrived promptly, his Bible tucked under one arm. I have my own testimony to add, he said, settling into the chair Eli had vacated. Last spring, Luke found a yearling mixed in with his herd. Had the Watson brand, though it was hard to make out. He not only returned it, but helped mend Watson's fence line to keep it from wandering again. Never asked a penny for the work. Amanda recorded his account in her neat handwriting, adding it to the growing stack. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Peterson, the dressmaker, hurried in. I couldn't help overhearing, she said, smoothing her apron. I've got something to add about Luke Brannan's character. 2 months back he ordered work shirts, paid full price up front, he did, when most men ask credit. Said a clean ledger makes for clear conscience. One by one, she documented their statements. When Sheriff Avery stopped by on his rounds, she had him witness each signature, making everything official. The sheriff's weathered face showed approval at her thoroughness. One more task, Amanda said, gathering her skirts. I must check the telegraph office. Inside the telegraph office, the operator handed her a fresh message. Her heart quickened as she read the response from the St. Louis and Western Railroad's legal department. The words confirmed what they had suspected. Uncle Thomas's debt was explicitly tied to the Springs status. If Luke's water rights were restricted, Pike could call in the loan immediately. The motive, she whispered, clear as day. She was copying the telegram into her notes when hoofbeats drew her to the window. Captain Jesperson and his sergeant were riding in, their army uniforms coated with trail dust. She hurried outside to meet them. Captain, thank you for coming, she said. Would you care for coffee before the hearing? The captain dismounted, his movements precise despite obvious fatigue. Much obliged, Mrs. Brannan. She led them to the hotel restaurant, where fresh coffee steamed in thick ceramic cups. As they sipped, Amanda presented her carefully prepared summary. The pages detailed critical times, names, and distances, all the facts needed to evaluate Pike's accusation. Here are the calculations showing how far cattle can be driven in one night, she explained, turning a page. And the time required to heat a branding iron hot enough to mark. The distances don't align with Pike's claim. Captain Jesperson studied each page with military attention to detail. His sergeant took notes in a small leather book. Very thorough, Mrs. Brannan, the captain said finally. You have my word we'll ensure a fair hearing. The town hall bell began to toll, its deep notes rolling across the evening streets. Amanda gathered her documents as townspeople streamed toward the building, carrying folding chairs and talking in low voices. Through a side window, she caught a glimpse of Luke being led from the jail. Despite his shackled wrists, his face remained calm and steady. Their eyes met briefly. He gave her a slight nod that carried more warmth than words could express. She straightened her spine, clutching her folder of evidence. The truth was assembled, witnesses gathered, and impartial authorities present. Now justice would have its say. As she turned toward the hall's main entrance, the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose, a reminder that even the darkest days must end in light. Stepping into the crowded hall, Amanda moved toward the front where Captain Jesperson and Sheriff Avery conferred quietly. The assembled testimony in her hands felt like a shield of truth against Pike's false accusations. Whatever came next, she had done everything possible to ensure Luke would receive a fair hearing. The town hall's pine-board walls glowed in lamplight as people filed in, the scent of fresh-cut wood mixing with sharp kerosene from wall sconces. Amanda settled into a front bench, her folder of evidence balanced carefully in her lap. The gathered townsfolk filled every available chair and lined the walls, their whispers echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Sheriff Avery stood at the front table, his badge catching the light as he raised his hands for quiet. Captain Jesperson sat beside him, military straight in his dusty uniform, while Mr. Holt arranged his brand books and tools on the table between them. "This hearing will come to order," Sheriff Avery announced, his voice carrying to the rafters. "We're here to examine accusations against Luke Brannan regarding 12 head of cattle allegedly stolen and rebranded last night." Pike Mallory rose from his chair, brushing invisible dust from his fine wool coat. "Sheriff, my men discovered the theft at dawn, fresh brands still healing, clear as day. The cattle were taken from my holding pens and marked with Brannan's B-bar." Mr. Holt cleared his throat and held up a piece of tanned hide. "Before we proceed further, I'd like to demonstrate something about brand manipulation." He picked up 2 branding irons, one clearly worn with use, the other fresh forged. With practiced moves, he showed how a second brand could be burned over an existing mark. "See here, when you overlay brands, the newer mark obscures the old, but the scarring underneath tells the true story." The brand inspector moved to where Pike's supposed stolen cattle were visible through the open doors. His weathered hands parted the hair around the fresh brands, examining the skin beneath. "These cattle show healed scars inconsistent with marks made last night. The tissue patterns suggest the original brandings happened weeks ago." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pike's face darkened, but before he could speak, Nantan stood, his dignity commanding attention. Beside him, the elder woman Sosie nodded her encouragement. 2 nights past, we heard cattle being moved, Nantan said, his English clear and measured. The sound carried from east to west toward the railroad yard. Many hooves after midnight. We know this trail well. It was not last night? Sosie added her own words in Apache, which Nantan translated. The moon was different then. Last night was too dark for such work. Young Eli stepped forward next, twisting his hat in his hands. His voice quavered at first, but grew stronger as he spoke of Luke's character. Mr. Brannan gave me boots when I had none, paid fair wages even when times were lean. He always said honest dealing matters more than quick profit. The boy's clear eyes challenged anyone to doubt him. I've seen him track down rightful owners of strays, even when nobody would have known if he kept them. Amanda rose then, her documents arranged in careful order. I have evidence of motive in this accusation, she said, holding up the telegram. This wire from the St. Louis and Western Railroad's legal office confirms that Mr. Mallory can call in my uncle's store debt if Luke's spring water becomes restricted. The timing of these theft charges, just after our wedding, suggests an attempt to remove Luke from his land rather than any actual cattle theft. Pike's foreman snorted from his place by the wall. That's just wild speculation, ma'am. Amanda turned to face him directly. Then you won't mind if we examine the wagon you were using yesterday? The one still parked behind the railroad office? The foreman's face twitched. Sheriff Avery noted his reaction and nodded to his deputy. Cole, go check that wagon. Thoroughly. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then Deputy Cole returned, holding something wrapped in burlap sacking. He placed it on the table and pulled away the cloth, revealing a branding iron. The B-bar mark on its face was newly forged, its metal still showing tool marks. Found this hidden under feed sacks, Cole reported. Iron's clean, never been heated. Mr. Holt compared the iron to his county brand book. The lower loop is longer than the registered B-bar mark. This is a deliberate forgery. The room erupted in angry mutters. Sheriff Avery banged his palm on the table for order. Luke Brannan, you may speak to your whereabouts. Luke stood slowly, his shackles clinking in the sudden quiet. His voice came steady and clear. Yesterday I spent morning to noon building my lean-to kitchen. Mrs. Sutter was there chaperoning until 3 o'clock. Rode to town with my wife for the license posting, spoke with Reverend Hart until sunset. Was at my ranch by dark, checking fence lines. Olin, my hand, can verify I never left the property after that. He named each person, each hour, without embellishment or excuse. Captain Jesperson leaned forward, studying the assembled evidence. The mismatched brand iron, the telegram showing motive, the multiple witnesses placing Luke elsewhere, and the physical proof of older brands beneath fresh burns. The room held its breath, waiting. Amanda watched Pike's face as the evidence mounted against him. His confident smile had vanished, replaced by a tightness around his eyes that spoke of desperation. She clasped her hands together, the weight of her wedding ring reminding her of all they stood to lose, or save. The late afternoon sun slanted through the hall's windows, painting stripes of light across the gathered faces. In that golden illumination, truth was emerging like a photograph slowly developing, clear, undeniable, and just. Pike Mallory's face twisted with rage as the evidence mounted against him. In one desperate motion, he lunged toward the door, shoving past a startled townsman. But Captain Jesperson moved with military precision, stepping into Pike's path. The captain's weathered hand hovered near his holster, though he made no move to draw. That would be unwise, Mr. Mallory, Captain Jesperson said quietly. Pike froze, his fine coat wrinkled from the sudden movement. Behind him, his foreman tensed, eyes darting between the door and the gathered crowd. Sheriff Avery's boot heels clicked on the wooden floor as he approached. Pike Mallory, James Wheeler. He addressed both men formally. You're under arrest for fraud and cattle theft. He moved with practiced efficiency, collecting their revolvers. The sheriff checked each weapon carefully, notching the cylinders to prevent firing before securing them in his gun belt. The room remained hushed as Avery produced his manacles. Steel clinked against steel as he secured first Pike, then the foreman. The railroad man's usual swagger had vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped silence. At the front table, Deputy Cole unlocked Luke's shackles. The key scraped loud in the quiet room, the sound echoing off the pine walls. The irons fell away, and Luke rubbed his wrists, his expression unchanging. Amanda stepped into the center aisle just as Luke did the same. They met without hurry or dramatic gesture, just two people finding each other in a crowd. Their hands clasped naturally, fingers intertwining. The simple touch spoke more than any embrace could have. Mr. Holt cleared his throat, his brand book open before him. "For the record," he announced. "Examination of the cattle in Pike Mallory's holding pens reveals multiple instances of rebranding. The original marks match known strays from open-range grazing. None belong to the Brannan Ranch." He made careful notes as he spoke, his pencil scratching across the paper. Reverend Hart stood from his seat near the wall. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "we might take a moment to thank the Lord for justice done this day." The townsfolk bowed their heads without hesitation. Even Captain Jesperson removed his campaign hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. The preacher's words filled the hall with quiet strength, asking for wisdom and mercy in equal measure. As the last Amen faded, Sheriff Avery gestured to his prisoners. "Time to go, gentlemen." He guided them towards the door, past the white-painted church that stood sentinel across the street. The evening sun cast long shadows as they made their way to the jailhouse. Captain Jesperson conferred briefly with his sergeant, a steady-eyed man who had observed the proceedings in silence. "Keep watch tonight," the captain ordered. "We don't want any unofficial justice being served." The sergeant nodded, taking up position where he could observe both the jail and the main street. His presence would discourage any hot-headed attempts at frontier vengeance. Amanda squeezed Luke's hand once before releasing it. "I need to check on Uncle Thomas," she said. Her practical nature was already turning to the next tasks at hand. She found her uncle in the mercantile's back room, sitting more easily in his chair than she had seen in days. The worry lines around his eyes had softened, and his persistent cough seemed less frequent. "It's done, then?" he asked as she entered. "Yes," Amanda replied, moving to the desk. She pulled out fresh paper and began to write in her neat hand. "But we need to ensure this cannot happen again." Her pen scratched across the page as she outlined a plan, a rotating schedule of townspeople to witness water use at Luke's Spring, creating a record that could stand in any court. Next, she detailed the steps for meeting with the county clerk about Pike's bond. The railroad would have required one, and it could be attached to repay the store's debt. The lamp in the mercantile kitchen cast a warm glow as evening settled. Amanda ladled hot stew into 2 bowls while Luke built up the fire against the growing chill. They sat close at the wooden table, speaking quietly of practical things, which fences needed mending first, when to check the springs flow, how to arrange the store's ledgers for her twice-weekly reviews. "We can ride home after breakfast tomorrow," Luke said, breaking off a piece of bread. "Need to see to the stock early." Amanda nodded, appreciating how he said "home" so naturally. Their marriage might have started from scandal, but it would continue in honest partnership. She watched him eat, noting how the tension had finally eased from his shoulders. Outside, the town settled into its evening routine. The sergeant's steady footsteps passed the window at regular intervals. From the church, lamplight spilled across the street as Reverend Hart prepared for evening prayers. The familiar sounds of horses being stabled for the night and shopkeepers locking up floated through the cooling air. Here in the kitchen's warmth, Amanda and Luke shared this moment of quiet victory. Not with grand celebrations or speeches, but with hot stew and gentle words about tomorrow's work. It was, Amanda thought, exactly right for them both. Dawn painted the eastern sky in soft rose and gold as Amanda and Luke mounted their horses. The morning air held the crisp promise of autumn, though summer's warmth still lingered. They rode at an easy pace, letting their horses pick their way along the familiar track into town. Their first stop was the whitewashed church, where Reverend Hart and his wife were sweeping the front steps. The wooden boards still showed scuff marks from last night's gathering. Mrs. Hart's face brightened at their approach. "We wanted to thank you both," Amanda said, smoothing her riding skirt as Luke helped her down, "for everything." Reverend Hart clasped Luke's hand warmly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Sometimes even through scandal to bring about blessing." At the depot, the telegraph operator was just opening up, keys jingling as he unlocked the door. Amanda had her messages already written in her neat hand. The first went to the railway's legal counsel in St. Louis, formally notifying them of Pike Mallory's arrest and the evidence of fraud. The second detailed wire went to Mr. Holt's office, ensuring the brand inspector's findings would be properly filed. The sun had climbed higher by the time they crested the last rise to Luke's, their homestead. The morning light caught the new wooden boards of the lean-to kitchen, still bright and unweathered. Amanda dismounted and immediately fetched the broom, attacking the dust that had settled during yesterday's absence. Luke led both horses to the water trough, then swung the pasture gate wide to let their small herd graze the sweeter grass near the spring. They hadn't been home an hour when the first wagon arrived. Mrs. Sutter climbed down carefully, a cloth-covered basket releasing the warm scent of fresh bread. Olin followed soon after, his buckboard loaded with planks and nails. Then came Nantan, leading his paint pony, a beautifully braided lead rope coiled in his hands. "For the house," he said simply, offering the rope to Amanda. The intricate pattern spoke of hours of careful work. The neighbors gathered in the yard, speaking of building a small additional room, a guest bunk for travelers who might need shelter. Olin sketched rough plans in the dirt with a stick, while Luke nodded approval. Amanda served stew at noon, the pot stretched with extra vegetables to feed their impromptu work crew. Over bowls steaming in the autumn air, they discussed the spring. Each family would sign the water ledger during drought weeks, sharing the flow by careful measure. It was a simple solution, born of neighbors choosing fairness over greed. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Amanda stepped inside. She carefully stored Uncle Thomas's deed copies in a tin box, sliding it beneath their bed for safekeeping. The carved horse from Nantan found its place on the mantel, its smooth lines catching the late sunlight. Luke worked until dusk, mounting a bell near the porch post. Its clear tone carried well, a signal for welcome or warning. Amanda lit the lamp, setting it in the window where its glow would guide any late travelers. They sat together on the porch steps, speaking quietly of plans. Their table would be open on Sundays, not just to family, but to orphans, widows, and those between homes. The idea felt right, transforming their hasty marriage into something larger than themselves. Night settled over the grassland like a soft blanket. From the ridge above, their lamp shone steady, a bright square of warmth and promise against the darkness, beckoning welcome to all who might need it. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.